You're not stuck at your rating because you're not studying enough, and it's not because you don't have any talent either. There are two invisible mistakes in your games, and as long as they're still in there, you're going to keep losing completely winning positions. The first position is a really common opening situation, and Black's got a strong tactical idea here. Knight takes on e4, and this isn't a sack, because after knight takes, you follow up with pawn to d5, a fork that wins the piece back. Most of the time, your opponent goes with the first move he sees, like bishop takes on d5, thinking he's at least grabbing a pawn along the way. But that move's an inaccuracy because after queen takes, we end up with a strong center and we hit the knight. And it doesn't have a square to go back to, since if it goes to any square, it drops the pawn on g2. So in the end, we're left with the bishop pair and a crushing position. So for white, it's worth staying away from that automatic move and taking a look at the other options. They've got pawn to d3, which backs up the knight and the bishop, or they can pull the bishop back to d3, which is even better because after the trade, there's a bishop sitting really nicely in the center. And since strategically the bishop is better than the knight, the game keeps going with chances for both sides. That's what they should have done, but instead they go bishop takes on d5, and after queen takes, they find themselves in trouble. The first thing they've got to sort out is defending that knight, which can't move because it's still tied to defending the pawn on g2. Up to here, the one who gave in to the impulse was your opponent, but now the situation flips over to your side because that same mistake can catch you even when you're in a better position, and in some cases with a winning position right there in your hands. If white goes queen to f3, how would you play in black's shoes? Two natural ideas show up: pawn to f5 to kick the knight away, or even better, knight to d4. And that move looks winning because it hits the queen and it hits the pawn on c2. And out of that comes a fork on the king and the rook. The queen can't just step away easily either because it's got to keep guarding the knight on e4, so it really looks like we're crushing. The problem is that when we get that tunnel vision with a tempting move, we rush to play it, and only afterwards we find out it was a blunder. White has the counter, knight to f6, a discovered attack on the queen, and the one losing material is us, because we're going to have to take the knight with the pawn and lose the queen on d5. That's devastating, and we can just resign right there. And it's the kind of thing that if it happens to me, I get mad. And I keep thinking, how did I not see that cheap trick? Because the position was great for black. All it took was playing bishop to e6 first, defending the queen, and then on the next move, knight to d4 and f5 would probably win the game. And that's rule number one. Never play the tempting move right away. Think at least one move ahead. You don't need to calculate a bunch of lines, so you just ask yourself, if I go knight to d4, what's my opponent going to play? What matters are his aggressive replies, because if he just goes with something like queen to d1, there's no danger at all. What matters are the forcing moves, the checks, the takes, or the attacks. Those are the moves you've got to check, and you can do that pretty quick, and that's how you avoid blunders like this one. Alright, so you know the rule now, but would you actually apply it under pressure? Let's test it. And going back a little, there's another line here. If instead of queen to f3, white goes pawn to d3, black answers with pawn to f5 to kick the knight away, and then take the pawn on g2. White goes queen to h5 with check, and how would you play here? After everything you've seen already, take a second before you play the most obvious move and apply rule 1. Think one move ahead and ask yourself what your opponent's going to do in response. Because most of the time, if you go pawn to g6, that's a mistake, since it loses to knight to f6 check, which wins the queen, and the whole thing flips completely, and white gets a really pretty counterattack. And that's so crazy, because if you think, well, I'm going to go g6 since I hit the queen and I cover the check, and when she steps away, I win the knight on e4. Again, the move looks so good that we rush to play it, and we let the countershot knight to f6 slip right by. So don't play tempting moves right away. Take a few seconds and ask yourself whether your opponent can attack you. In this case, there's a saving resource that doesn't lose right away, so follow along with me. After knight to f6 check, we still got the resource king to f7, and if knight takes the queen, you take his queen. Even so, we still lose the pawn on c7, and we're left with a totally wrecked pawn structure and a completely ruined position. If you held back that urge to move fast and didn't go g6 on impulse, you'd end up spotting the right move, which is queen to f7 covering the check and pretty much forcing the queen trade. And after queen takes, king takes, we're left with a comfortable position because even though we can't castle with the queens off the board, it's hard for us to get attacked. And on top of that, we've got a strong pawn center. The knight's going to have to move. We've got the bishop pair, and we've got the threat of playing knight to d4 and hitting c2 with a potential fork on the king and the rook. And if you look at it from white's perspective, they've only got a check on g5 and nothing beyond that, because the knight on its own isn't going to checkmate us. So notice how a single move can either ruin your position or hand you all of that advantage, right? Now that you've learned how to get away from playing on autopilot, it's time to take it up another level. White's a play, and the question is simple. What's the best move to keep going here? While you think about that, let me tell you something real quick. I'm not a grandmaster, and until not that long ago, I was 1200, just like you, probably. And that's exactly why I know what's holding you back, because I lived through it myself the hard way. You learn the fundamentals and you improve fast at the start. So you had 1,000, 1,200, and then you're stuck. The rating goes up a bit, comes down a bit, but real improvement, actual improvement, it just doesn't happen. Sometimes for years, and nobody explains to you why. It was only after I got out of that plateau that I could look back and see it clearly, because there's a short list of mistakes that pretty much every player at this level makes. Simple mistakes. Mistakes that disappear from your games the minute you learn how to spot them. The first one you just learn how to avoid, which is playing on autopilot. But the second one is sneakier, because it goes after the player who already thinks before moving, and that's the one hiding in this position right here. And here's where the second mistake comes in, which is the more dangerous of the two, because it's completely silent. You want to see how it works in practice? I'm gonna read your mind right now and show you exactly how most players calculate this position. Your brain probably went straight to rook to d1, because after all, if to check, that would hit the king, and it also set up an x-ray on the knight on d7, so it looks like a promising idea. The problem is that if you go rook to d1 right away with that idea in mind, you end up losing the knight on c4, and that's why the idea doesn't work, because it'd just be a trade. You can still get the knight on d7 back, but since the one on c4 is already gone, at the end of the day, you don't come out up material. Then comes the natural question. What if before playing rook to d1, you trade the knight first and go knight takes bishop? If your opponent takes with a pawn, then the idea fits perfectly, and you come out a piece up, because from there, it's just rook to d1 check, and you win the knight on c7. But obviously, your opponent isn't going to make it easy for you, because the most logical move in this position is for your opponent to take with the knight. And now, the default themes are gone. The problem is that the most logical thing for black is to take back with the knight itself, opening up the d-file. So there's still the option of giving the check, but that's it, nothing more. And the result, once again, you come out empty-handed. So then you try to solve the problem another way. What if knight goes to d6, hitting the rook and the pawn on b7 at the same time, and gaining time to set up the plan? But that still doesn't help, because if rook comes to e6 and you go rook to d1 check, your opponent can go king to c2, attacking the rook. And once again, we end up in a position where we're not getting any advantage at all. You might ask me something like, come on, Philip, after trying all these ideas, I kind of freeze up and I think, I don't know, maybe it's time to just trade everything on b6 and see what happens. And you end up going rook to c7 or something like that. The real reason we can't find a winning idea for white isn't just about a lack of calculation. It's also the fact that we got locked on to the rook to d1 idea and we keep trying to force it through. And here's where rule number 2 comes in, breaking out of obsession mode. When an idea looks way too promising, it's easy to keep pushing it and forget to look around. So instead of always insisting on the same plan, look for candidate moves and consider alternative ways to attack. The moment we set rook to d1 aside and take a look at what else is out there, it jumps right out at us that knight to b2 also gives check, and that move needs to be calculated. This time, the king is forced to go to the only square available, which is king to e4. And here's the interesting detail. That same relationship we were going for before with king and rook lined up on the same file shows up again now on the e-file. The plan comes together by trading the bishop and then playing rook to e1 check. And finally, the x-ray works without a single flaw. So in the end, we find the winning solution, and we're left with a totally winning position. So let's recap your new arsenal. Rule 1, never play the tempting move right away. Think one move ahead and check your opponent's forcing moves. And rule 2, break out of obsession mode and look for candidate moves. These 2 rules on their own are already going to make a difference in your next games, seriously. But look, they're just 2 pieces of a whole calculation method that I put together while I was climbing out of the plateau. So if you're up for it, come take a look at Think Ahead with me. And here's the thing, if you apply the method properly in 1 week, you're already going to feel the difference on the board. Less playing on autopilot, less panicking in complicated positions, and more games won that you used to let slip away. If that makes sense to you, the link's in the description and in the pinned comment. Click now. Because if you stop here, you already know how this story ends. If you enjoyed and learned something new, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.